we are the experts here, and actually we're kind of looking towards the panel today to sort of bring up some of those discussion points and actually start some conversations and learn as much as possible ourselves and bring that kind of richness into the advertising industry, into the social industry as well. So we're all learning here together, so nobody is an expert. I think this is something that will obviously change massively in the future anyway. But I think personally, overtourism is a really interesting, rich discussion, and particularly this week, I think we have a really pertinent time to actually start talking about this with the demise of Thomas Cook. We're looking at the way people are travelling, and from the outset, a lot of information looked like people were travelling less. And in fact, what we see is that a huge amount of people are travelling more. Actually, 60% of people in the UK last year said that they've gone abroad. So people are definitely travelling, but they're doing it in massively different ways. The ultimate demise of Thomas Cook just means that people are no longer travelling to spaces that are created to cater for large people going to the same space. People want things different, they want new experiences, they want to be looking differently, and also they want to be liked predominantly on social media. They want the places that they're tagging to look really different, they want those spaces. Increasingly, that means that what we have is a surge in population in places that aren't built for it, they're not ready for it, and that leads ultimately to, well, the beginning of overtourism. So when you have a few spots with a few thousand in their general population, that moves to 100,000 at one very specific point at a time in the year, there's always going to be problems. And I think it's looking at the role that we have in that. What can brands do? What can our clients do? What can we do to actually look at that? And within a kind of influencer-focused life now, what can we kind of look at in terms of that? It's not just cruise ships anymore. It's not just homestays. It's not just tagging. These are all cumulative problems, and I think when we're looking at pointing to the best destinations and the best places that we want to send influence that we want to actually start talking about, there are loads of different ways that we can do this, and I think not just looking at the negatives. Luckily, we're not just listen to me rambling on today. We have a huge amount of people with a load of positive solutions and ideas that we can actually start looking at, which is great, and we can start combating this. But what we know already is that brands are already starting to look at this anyway. But we can see here, so on Visit Switzerland, they actually went out and asked people, what are the places you're seeing in Switzerland that are already overcrowded? Like, what are the places? And they're actually using the hashtags to actually overcome this. And it's a really interesting way, because they're kind of like battling that straight, head on. And a lot of tourist boards are doing this, a lot of brands are doing this, and actually looking to the spaces that they know are overpopulated and going straight to those audiences that are kind of doing it anyway. This is something that comes from social. This is an insight, because this is my sister in Canada, and this is showing exactly the reality of Instagram and what's going on. So we know it's not just brands making it up or looking for focal points. This is actually happening from a very base level. I mean, this is someone with 200 followers. I follow her, that's about it. And then this one was really interesting. I think this is somebody looking at from the other side of things, actually showing things how they are in these destinations. And this was interesting in Pornhub, who shot a film on a beach as it was. It wasn't beautiful, it wasn't showing it how it's all been cleaned up and absolutely perfect, showing that amazing view. It was as it was, and every time there was a click, they donated to different funded areas to clean up, for beach cleans basically, and funding different programs. And I thought it was just a really interesting way of actually going about it. They're all looking at overtourism, they're kind of getting it, but we kind of wanted to bring that conversation back. And ask all of you guys, first of all, and then I'm going to go to the panel. As you said, we've got these Slido, so you can all feed in today on what you think overtourism is. So if you're on the site whilst you're putting in your questions for the amazing panel, you can also feed in your thoughts, because we want to know what everybody thinks. This is just my thoughts at the moment. We want to know what everyone else is thinking. But first of all, I'm going to go back and introduce our incredible panel. So, have a little round of applause for the panel. Go from left to right. So we have Jen Stubley. I'm just going to get you to go a little bit of a detail of sort of what you guys do and what your focus is.
Hi everyone, my name is Jen. I'm the social media lead at London Partners, so I head up the team for London Partners, is the Mayor of London's official promotional agency for the city. There are various sub-brands underneath that overarching company name, the biggest one being our London Tourism Board, so visitlondon.com, if any of you have heard of that. We also manage social for the London Convention Bureau on the B2B side, and Study London, which is the official student guide for London. And our remit as a company is to attract various different audiences internationally to choose London for various different reasons, whether it be to bring an event here, choose a London university for studies, or travel here for a holiday or a break.
And we have Besma.
Sure. Hello, I'm Besma. I write an eco-friendly lifestyle blog called Curious to Conscious, and last year I set up Ethical Influencers. Ethical Influencers is a platform for influencers to join. We have just over 500 members as of being 1 year old. And within the platform, we talk about environmental topics and ways to be more sustainable, but for each member doing it in their own authentic way. So we have a number of travel bloggers on there, but we have people doing all kinds of lifestyle in 13 different countries and creating content and doing things in a positive way.
And Jed?
I'm Jed. I founded last year the world's first organisation entirely dedicated to the promotion of low season travel. So that's travel exclusively during the low seasons in each different destination. And for the past about 25 years I've been working in the global travel and tourism industry with the likes of, sadly, Thomas Cook, TUI, Cuffe, and also I spent about 10 years of that on the air service development side of the travel industry, working with airlines, airports and tourism authorities on the capacity side of it.
How funny, Tim.
Hi there. My name is Tim Williamson. I'm one of the owners. I'm one of the owners of Responsible Travel. We're the largest, we're a global platform that connects customers to about 450 ethical tour operators around the world. Our business is mainly driven by SEO, but we also are what we call an activist brand, so we campaign for change within the tourism industry. Our vision is to make tourism a more caring industry, so change is the heart of our agenda. Prior to that, I've been marketing director of various travel businesses for the last 30 years, including TUI UK.
So you can see we've got a lot of different experience here. So I think this would also then feed into how you think overtourism has grown, and ultimately I just want to put to you all, first of all, what do you think, in your eyes, is the biggest thing that's led to the rise in overtourism? Who wants to jump in first?
I think it is relatively new. For me, it's what's caused it has been complete deregulation. The deregulation of the air market with open skies. So just the abundance of flights that are available, the complete oversupply of flights. So you pretty much can't get anywhere for the price of a meal, which is clearly wrong. You've got deregulation of the homestay market and a lack of kind of paying their way, I would say there as well. And then you've got the emergence of new markets as well, so the Indian and Chinese particularly. Everyone's supposedly got a right to travel, which I would question, but clearly there are people coming into the market that are expanding it, and they want to go to the same sites, which is leading to overtourism.
Similar to Tim really. When I set up low season travel, I started to look at the macro trends behind overtourism, because obviously overtourism is a key driver on this. And some things just immediately leapt out. You've got the growing middle classes, stands at 3.7 billion today, so that's people that have their own home, have their own car, etc., and aspire to, and indeed do, take foreign holidays and overseas travel. That's going to grow by 160 million in the next 5 years alone, so that's a huge part of it. Chinese, at the beginning of this century in 2000, 10 million Chinese trips were made by Chinese nationals, and today it stands at 140 million, which is an incredible difference. And in the next 10 years it will be 400 million. And so again, that affects different destinations around the world in terms of over-tourism, because a lot of them are travelling to Europe, the US, and all the destinations we would. As Tim alluded to, more aircraft. So we've got more flights going. There are more aircraft than there have ever been before in the skies, and that means there's more seats and seat capacity, which means the prices then tend to be lower again, as Tim mentioned there. Just Airbus alone, and you can check this on the Airbus website if you're inclined. I do that kind of thing because I'm a geek. Airbus alone have got 262 aircraft orders, which they'll be delivering on in the next year or two. That equates to 57 million seats capacity extra to where we are today. These are the kind of causes as to where over-tourism is coming from, as far as I'm concerned.
From a slightly different angle, I think the accessibility of being an influencer is a very big part of this, and people travelling purely for content and taking photos in Instagram-worthy places. To be honest, I am a massive fan of the fact that anybody can go out and create their own content, they can talk about things in a positive way, and that's partly why the group that I've created is kind of blown up, because I was expecting 50 people just to come along and talk about being eco-friendly. We have 500 people doing that in their own way all across the world. So everybody being able to have access to social media and then to be able to go out and take photographs of their day, tell their story in their own way, and actually go to different destinations and take those photos is one thing, but also the idea of then having overcrowding in certain destinations, everybody with their selfie stick, it gets a bit much sometimes, and you then see the difference between what you see on Instagram versus reality, because people are editing everybody out. So there is that issue, but at the same time, I think if we can be looking at influencing in a more positive way and talking about going to destinations where they might not be, Paris or New York or the kind of island holidays, they might be slightly more into different communities and investing in those communities and talking about both how to be positive within those communities, but also how enjoyable they are. You can then have a positive effect with that.
Yes, similar sort of answer. If we're talking about the rise of over-tourism, as much as I love social media, I've chosen to specialise my career in it, so I'm not going to shine it too much. I do think it's unfortunately played somewhat of a negative role in the last few years. I think it's not solely to blame. I think it's played a big part in accelerating over-tourism that was probably there and was being pushed by other mediums and media before. I don't want to again wave my finger at like millennials and millennial culture and their social media ruining travel, but we do live in kind of an Instagrammable culture, like a lot of glamorization of travel and sort of fake, very edited, staged photos. We kind of live in a generation that want to brag to their peers about where they're going and being at the new, coolest, hidden gem sort of thing. And unfortunately, I think that has played a role, but I do think that social has a role in mitigating that as well, which I guess I'll come on to later.
Yeah, I think I would just want to touch again and go further into social media a little bit as well, particularly with yourself on Besma, looking at how do you think the actual sort of actual ideas of social media and the functions of social media are helping that in the form of growing over-tourism?
I think as a kind of key example, even for myself, I'm guilty of this. This year I took 6 flights, so 3 trips, and I don't think I've had a year in my life where I've done that. And 2 of those were for going to visit somewhere and actually looking at different places in those cities, and one of them was a retreat in Lanzarote, and kind of documenting that and saying this is great because they've got their own solar panel farm and they've got food waste that goes to the chickens, and the people there were incredible and the way that they were working was brilliant, but at the same time I'm flying to those destinations, staying there for a short period of time and then going away and writing about it to promote them. So I think that's an issue.
And that's ultimately caused by you putting that on social media?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of it I'm going, it's great because you want to market those places and you want people to hear about them and go, I can have more of a sustainable impact, but I still have to offset those flights. And I don't think offsetting a flight is enough to be really sustainable, so that's an issue.
Yeah, because I suppose what you're doing essentially, Jen, is you need to bring people to London and actually have people in those locations. So how is social media sort of perpetuating the problem with over-tourism in the areas of London more specifically?
Yeah, for London it's slightly different. We've got an infrastructure, luckily, where we can deal with high volumes of people, different to smaller islands in the middle of nowhere that maybe can't deal with big influxes of people. I was reading somewhere, I don't know if I've just coined the phrase myself, but micro-overtourism, where we have a bit more of a problem in London of actually drawing people to specific spots or specific venues that are highly Instagrammable or highly coveted for the Instagram feed, and people will flock there just to get a photo. So social is one of our main strategies to sort of detract people from there and encourage more movement and dispersal around the city. We're also extremely targeted as a company in terms of knowing what audiences we do want to bring. So it's not just about numbers for us. Obviously, we do want to draw in visitors at a certain volume, but we want to draw them from specific demographics and specific locations around the world so that they have more value to London as a city. Considering all those 3 brands I mentioned that we work for, ideal for us would be for a young prospective student to come here and visit, potentially be inspired to go back and then move here to study here, and then choose to stay here after their studies and start a business or grow a business in London. So we've got kind of a more of a life journey in mind, rather than just bringing people here for short stays and then letting them leave again.
Yeah, I suppose that's kind of changing the role of the location. I think looking at, again, this is touching on sort of your trip to Lanzarote as well, like what we have a lot in social and definitely with brands and the way that we work with locations, so that locations become the influencers themselves. So how do you think, I mean this particularly goes to both Jen and Tim as well, with your businesses, how can you stop locations being used as the influencers when brands are pitching for an idea or looking to focus on an area, particularly looking at ecotourism as well?
I think the destination is always the star of the show. I think that more can be done in showing off the destinations at different times of the year and in a more responsible manner, and in a more authentic and honest way than has been done in the past. Instagram, social media, is that the cause of that? Well, yeah, I always feel uncomfortable with that because it's just a method of communication. It's no more a cause than, I said before, Judith Chalmers, everybody here is probably too young to remember Judith Chalmers, there used to be a holiday programme called Wish You Were Here. And she used to go to all these different destinations and show us how fantastic it was, and opened our eyes to a lot of destinations that we hadn't necessarily thought of or encountered before. Well, was she the starting point for Overtourism then? Because she was, encouraging people to travel to these destinations. But it's just a method of communication, and with social media, it's pervasive. It's everywhere. Everybody can be Judith Chalmers or whoever else, because everybody can go to those destinations and show how wonderful the destinations are. For me, I just want to see a little bit more responsibility on showing off those destinations at different times of the year. We touched on it before. Overtourism, a key part of it is surges in tourism. Most of the hotels in the Mediterranean, they operate on 20% capacity, and Tim will probably know more about this than I do, between the months of October through till, roughly speaking, the end of April. Is that a sustainable use of those hotels? Is that the best use of those properties? Not in the slightest. So more needs to be done to encourage and show off the destinations at the other times of the year. Is the experience worse? No, it's different. It's a different experience, but it's not necessarily a worse experience. And that's the kind of stuff that I think we need to get across in social media and otherwise.
Just to quickly touch upon that before we go to you, Tim, looking at telling brands, maybe specifically, or influencers to go to somewhere during a different time of the year, how do you think you can change that conversation? Because obviously I think it comes down to those images again, it comes down to the geotagging, and you want the image that's the same as everybody else's ultimately in a lot of these places. How can we start that conversation to kind of change the way we look at locations themselves in terms of their seasons and how we see them?
I think we need to make it a little bit more aspirational during the low seasons. For me, I almost wear it like I suppose it's like a bit of inverted snobbery, but I like to say, I've been to Rome, but I went during the low season. Therefore, my impact on Rome was far less. I had greater interaction with the local peoples there, actually it was more beautiful for the photographs because actually there's less people there, so actually that makes it better. So I think it's those kind of things really. It's about trying to show that the destination actually is slightly better during the low season, and I'm trying to encourage that conversation.
So back to you, Tim.
Yeah, I'll just come back to that point about the role of social media. I personally don't fully blame social media for this sort of Instagram culture. I think what's happened is that it's filled the void, and the void has been left by, yes, we've always had it. Judith Chalmers is a good example, but the difference there is scale. You know, the holiday program is very small, it influenced a few destinations. Social media is massive. But what it's really done is fill the void left by the demise of travel journalism. You think of, say, even 15 years ago, where journalists went out and weren't paid by travel companies or tourist boards to write objective editorial pieces about what was good and what was not good about a destination. That doesn't happen anymore. If journalists do go out, they're paid by a title or a media source to actually write something. They're never going to write something negative. It's always wonderful. It has been, and it's no surprise then that social media has picked up on this perfect world, this idea of paradise. So I think, to me, I would put the demise of travel journalism right up there as one of the causes of overtourism.
And that kind of leads neatly into what you do, Besma. How, looking at that and looking at the idea of the no negative, how do you work with influencers? Because that's what you do in terms from an ecotourism point of view. How do you work with people to use social media for good then, to avoid overtourism and to actually focus on perhaps the negatives, perhaps the differences? Like, how are you working with different people?
I think it's potentially both on the influencer and also the brands and the locations that they're working with. It's about understanding that no, you can't give an influencer a brief to come along and take beautiful photos and have to be polished and it has to be 100%. Instagram worthy, and actually looking at it the other way and saying, what's the authentic story behind it? How did you find the place? Did you go and meet the locals? Have you kind of gone and actually invested in the local economy? Are you doing something where it's working with people in a positive way? At the same time, I mean, from an influence perspective, generally, not just on eco-travel, but actually for everybody who's on the platform, we're trying to get more opportunities going to micro-influencers rather than simply the big people who shout louder and have a bigger following. We found that people who have larger followings actually tend to have less engagement, and the engagement rate is lower. So instead of sourcing one person and flying them halfway around the world to focus on somewhere because they've got a great following, why don't you find 10 people who are more local to that area to come along, visit the place, and actually A, reduce the impact of that travel, but B, also work with people who are going to be more open to creating content, who are going to be passionate about the area, who are going to actually know a little bit more about the culture rather than just coming in for a couple of hours and then coming back out. And that's something I've seen even now. I went to a festival this year and I saw somebody come along on a ticket alongside me and they were there for 4 hours. They literally took more than 4 hours to get there, 4 hours just taking photos around the festival site and then straight back out. They saw half a set and then they left. And you think, that's creating content for the sake of content. You didn't have a good time, you didn't enjoy the time you were there, you didn't have an impact within the festival itself, and you basically had a negative impact on the environment. So changing it where people are travelling because they genuinely want to make those journeys, they want to invest in those local economies rather than just turning up, staying in the hotel very quickly and then disappearing. I think it's really important.
And do you find with that content that the uptake from the audience is actually better? The engagement rates? I suppose when people are looking at investing in micro-influencers, obviously brands and clients thinking about this, there is obviously the payback, which I personally think is a fantastic way to do it. You're getting a much richer experience. But how do you find the engagement from the people you've been working with?
I mean, from my side, so I don't actually manage the kind of engagement rates or campaigns that come through. We have more to do with sourcing people from our network. So the 500 people we've got there are all welcome to work with brands and list their opportunities on the site. But actually from just generally working within the community themselves, people are, those who are trying to be more conscious of the environment are already saying, I don't want to fly to lots of places just to create content, I don't want to travel or have a negative impact. It kind of goes against my own values, so how can I be authentic in that way and work with the brands that are saying, we want you to travel, we want you to come to this festival, go there. And then in terms of actually looking at content being created around being sustainable. I think a great example is one that I've been working on with Ren Skincare, and they've been working with Plastic Control. So Plastic Control is a charity that runs litter picking on paddle boards at beaches. They have people going out into the environment and picking up plastic. From my own personal content and creating that, those have received almost double the amount of engagement than anything else. And no, it's not glamorous to be on a paddleboard when you're picking up, plastic bottles out of a canal, but people want to see that, and then you get the message of, okay, but all of Ren Skincare's products are now coming in recycled plastic packaging. You've got that good story alongside that kind of good impact, and I think that needs to be a model that people can see and echo that within tourism as well.
I think that goes back to your point about honesty again.
I think one of the unique things about travel and how it's consumed as a product is that whatever the marketing says about a destination or a hotel or a ship or whatever, the customer will then see it in its reality. So if you put something up which is so clearly false or so clearly fake, and then the customer sees it, that's going to jar hugely. And in a world of information, customers know that paradise doesn't exist. We sell holidays to pretty much every single country, and every single country has a responsible tourism issues page. Everywhere has issues, and you're naive to say that it doesn't. So I think there's an opportunity to be upfront and start to be a brand, be an influencer, or be a company that confronts honesty and starts to experiment with honesty. As I mentioned, we're an SEO-based business, and our traffic comes from content. And this demise I talked about of really authentic, good travel journalism has given us a great opportunity. And we have a team of 7 writers, and they write travel guides, and they write about what not to do, what to avoid, when not to go, what are the responsible tourism issues. And Google likes the content. Google, the returns to search are minimal. So we compete, against much bigger brands with much better domain authority than us. And we do that through honesty, and I think that for me is the biggest opportunity for brands and for social media around tourism.
And how is that working in London? Because I know you have a lot of different areas, obviously very pinpointed.
Yeah.
How do you bring that to using social media to kind of bring that honesty and change the way you work with people?
I was going to say, I think in general, in terms of the social landscape, there's been such a huge shift in authenticity and being more honest. Across the board, not just travel, like big Instagrammers, body positivity is a huge theme at the moment on Instagram, and more authentic pictures of people travelling is also more of a trend. There was a workshop that I went to with Instagram about 3 years ago, and they actually described the platform at that time as being quite a snobby platform. As one that, the feed is very curated, people tend to think through what images they're going to post and only post kind of one every few days. And I think that there's definitely a shift moving away from that. You can see that in the evolution of the platform as well. So stories tend to be a little bit less perfected. If you want to, you can show kind of behind the scenes of an image. That's a big strategy for us, and we don't tend to make them too sort of beautiful and unrealistic. But IGTV is something that I'm a huge fan of as well, and I think that for any brand, and not just London, using IGTV and longer form content to sort of tell the story behind a picture or a place is really important. And we're trying to do that more with the sort of Instagram hotspots as well. Has anyone been to the Mayfair lavender fields? There's a few of them sort of in and around London. But they're just fields upon fields of lavender, and you would get typical beautiful influencers just standing in the middle of the field posing, and it's a very lovely photo, but that is not the purpose of the farm. So we've been in contact.
Probably killing a lot of lavender.
Yeah, exactly. It's not very sustainable or environmentally friendly. So we obviously have shared a couple of those photos, and it's a very popular. Newly popular Instagrammable destination, but we're working with the founders of those farms to sort of go and interview them, to help tell their story about what the farms are doing, what the purpose of the farm is, how they operate, the different things that you can go and do and see at the farm. And rather than us as a brand and the tourism board just posting the one photo without much context, we might run a longer form piece on IGTV or on Insta Stories to sort of explain the story and raise awareness of what these places are trying to do rather than just being for the gram.
And how do you get people to the areas of London, say, that they might not know about?
If we're looking at tourists coming into, going through geotagging and that kind of thing, like how are you actually moving them from those areas to these slightly more unknown places that you're telling these stories from?
Various different ways. London and Partners, the Partners part of the name comes from a big network of London-based businesses that we work with every single day to help expose their venue, their area, their product. A lot of those are boroughs. For the last few years, part of the Mayor of London's tourism strategy is to encourage dispersal throughout the city. So I mentioned that we want to bring visitors into the capital, but we want to bring them in and move them out of Zone 1 and even Zone 2. We work with local influencers or actually just local guides, people that have lived in these areas or boroughs for years. It's their home. They may well not have huge reach on social, but they create great content and they're authentic. So we'll work with them to help put together itineraries, get them to sort of experience the itineraries, showcase it to their followers and provide us with the content. We work with TfL a lot. They're a huge stakeholder in our business. They have a campaign called The Wonderful World of Off-Peak Travel. So a big part of the work that we do on social is highlighting these areas, but also highlighting the fact that they're not a million miles away and they take 10-15 minutes by tube, train, bus, cable car to get to. So yeah, highlighting a few different things at the same time helps with the dispersal element.
Just to sort of add to that, in the past year I've been doing the Low Season Traveller podcast, so I've been speaking to city tourism authorities and business convention bureaus from each of the cities, mainly around Europe but elsewhere as well, and asking them how they cope with overtourism and what they're trying to do in terms of dispersal as well. And one of the best examples I came across was Visit Brussels. So Visit Brussels have got an app whereby it geotags you everywhere you go, but you can see on the map where there are hotspots of local community versus where there are hotspots of tourists. So if you're craving to have more of an authentic experience in Brussels and you want to meet the local population, it'll show you, it does it to bar, restaurant level. It shows you, it's by where the phones are registered obviously. It shows you where there are Belgian people versus where there are tourists. And it's a really, really good app. But what they're trying to do in general is that it's almost making the city look like a theme park. I don't know if anybody's here been to a theme park like Old Towers or Disneyland or anything else. And when you first walk in, there's a sign which tells you the main attractions and it shows you the waiting time. And the reason that it does that is if it's a 3-hour waiting time, you're going to go to one of the other attractions, right? And that's what they're doing on these apps, and that's what Visit Brussels do really well. The big main attractions, it tells you what the waiting time is. Now again, they're obviously super connected among all of the attractions and Visit Brussels and the technology, but that one, the execution on it is particularly good, and I think that's a great way that they're trying to do something about it.
It kind of takes us back to, what we're still looking at here is destinations, essentially. Obviously people travelling to London, you're travelling to destinations to cover areas, you're sending people to eco areas to experience new things. But we're coming back to that sort of horrible area of flight shaming, which is becoming way more prevalent. As we've seen with Meghan and Harry, people are really taking notice of this. When people are booking influencers to fly to areas, like we're saying, or we are putting forward a destination for a shoot, how can clients and brands and people in general look to combating this and actually getting around the idea of flight shaming, aside from not flying? What's the kind of in between?
I'm going to go to you two first.
Okay, well you're right to highlight it, because flight shaming is coming. It's not a Scandinavian phenomenon, it's coming here, and it will influence all of us on our social media accounts. It'll influence the influencers and it'll influence the brands behind it, and that negative feedback that you're going to be getting is going to grow. And I think you need to think about, I think Besma made it about hiring local we were brought in by Telegraph to try and sort of help them with their travel department. So, we talked about, hiring local journalists. They had an extreme example of someone being flown from London to cover the eclipse in southern Chile. They were there for a day, and they would have burned, I don't know, maybe 6,000 to 7,000 kilograms of carbon for a long weekend. Utterly ridiculous. And you're telling me there's not a good person that could have covered that in South America. So it's ridiculous examples like that. So it is thinking about being local. And I think there's also the hard truth that when we look at, this is also a very important week, because it's not just Thomas Cook going under, but it's also the UN Climate Summit. There's no way around it. All of us as individuals and as companies are going to have to be flying less. If you take the Friends of the Earth number, it's roughly 18%, when you need to round it up to 20. So, as brands, you have to confront flight shame by saying, how are we going to be part of that? How are we going to help aviation meet its targets? If it goes on at the rate it's going, aviation will take a quarter of the world's carbon allowance by 2050. If it keeps growing at the rate it's growing. And that clearly is unsustainable. So something has to change, and we all have, I would say, as individuals and as brands that are influencers, have got to change that. It has to be around flying less. I would say it also has to be around cruising less as well. The dirtiest fuel is actually not kerosene, it's the bunker fuel that cruise ships burn. But the difference is both aren't taxed, which is ridiculous.
And how do you deal with that from a personal perspective with your influences? Sorry, I'm just going to talk really loudly to work it out. Because you're working with brands a lot of the time. So how are you taking that from a personal perspective?
I mean, for me, this year, I've written a lot about carbon offsetting, about calculating carbon emissions, and that's something I've done with Whayeb entirely as impact plus all my flights. But I'm aiming to do a no-fly year next year, so to basically cover local destinations more, to show that you can travel around the UK and Europe without needing to get in a plane. At the same time, I don't think it's a reasonable expectation to make for every single person, including influencers. I think people do need to travel for, whether it's business reasons, family reasons, people are connected around the world. And I mean, I started my blog because I was living in France and I was noticing different cultural changes and things that I was then adopting myself. And I think exposure to different cultures is still really, really important. But can we do it in a more sustainable way? Yes. We've now got social media that connects everybody around the world. So if you want to kind of experience those cultures, you can find people who are within them and we talk about it from a more authentic point of view. And it's really just about encouraging people to find alternatives. You can fly to Paris, but you can also get the Eurostar. Let's look at doing that, and can campaigns be thought around that instead of let's just find the easiest and cheapest way of getting somewhere. Let's be more responsible.
And I'm going to play devil's advocate here a little bit. When a lot of work we do here is very time limited, we would want the weeks and weeks and weeks to prepare things, but sometimes something will come up and you'll have to sort everything out super quick. Do you have any tips on how we can look to approach, say, shoots or content creation, taking all of that in mind? And that's quite a heavy question.
I mean, it's kind of the reason why I set the platform up, because I was being approached to do lots of different things in lots of different places with lots of different brands, and some of them just personally didn't work for me, others it was just, there's too much going on. And I'm thinking, right, can we not have a place where people can also then be sourced quite easily, rather than it all coming to the same couple of people who are talking about the same subjects. So while I've set up Ethical Influencers and it's talking about how to be more ethical, how to be more sustainable, if you are looking for content creators, photographers, designers, whoever it is in certain locations, go and find ways of sourcing them locally. You'll find that they've probably got more of a handle on how to get around that city, how to set themselves up, they can speak the language, they've got a lot more benefits you can get from that rather than just having somebody fly in somewhere. It really depends. It's still about combining convenience and then also how to be more sustainable.
And obviously you're working with various tourist boards for London as well, Jen. How are you working to kind of deal with the idea of flight shaming and less flying?
Yeah, it's a difficult one for us because we are challenged with bringing international visitors to London. We do also encourage domestic tourism, that's slightly separate. Firstly, we don't tend to fly many influencers over to London. We don't actually have huge budgets at all, so we don't do that much anyway. But when we do, we would work with, going back to that dispersal point, we work not only to disperse people around London, but to disperse people out of London to other cities as well. We've done a lot of campaigns around that over the last few years. So we've worked with, I think there are a couple of people from Visit Britain on the attendee list, but we work with Visit Britain a lot to encourage movement and dispersal around the UK and Ireland. There is an initiative called the Discover England Fund, and actually research out of that came that showed that there wasn't an issue with people coming to London, but it was highlighting other cities that are easy to get to from London that people can go to using the train. So I guess if people are coming from America, it's kind of better use of their miles or their flight if they are visiting multiple destinations over one longer trip rather than repeat visiting over a long period of time. And then a more recent campaign that's finished in the last couple of months has been with the Parisian Tourist Board. So we call it open jaw ticketing, but we're trying to encourage people to fly into one city, use other modes and means of transport to travel to another city, one or more, and fly home from somewhere else. So for us it's about extending the stay, making someone get the most out of their trip, using one return flight rather than multiple.
Great. Sorry, Jess, do you want to add anything to?
I was just going to say with the fly shaming, I think again in the not too distant future, I think we're going to be going back in time a little bit more, whereby actually air travel will be getting more expensive, and I think fewer people will be able to afford to fly. And the sad part about that is that, and I know you've got your concerns on this, Tim, but I don't think everybody has the right to travel around the world. But I think the advantages of people being able to travel and experience cultures around the world, I really passionately believe that does increase cultural understanding and ultimately peace. And I think it'd be a great shame if in the next 20, 30 years that my children and your children aren't able to avail of those opportunities. I think that would be a great shame, but sadly I think that's the direction that we're headed.
Just to round up before we go into the Q&A, so we're a little bit pressed for time, I want to get as many questions answered as possible. In your eyes, as a quick fire, what is the most important thing that a brand or person can take away from you guys today on how to work with destination content and influencers?
For me, it's about experimenting with honesty. I think it feels uncomfortable, but as soon as you put your toe in the water, I think the paybacks will be huge. I think you'll be rewarded for being brave and being honest.
For me, we live in the age of guilt. This morning I go and get a coffee from a Costa or a Nero, and I feel guilty because I'm seeing a plastic lid. If I get a ready meal, I feel guilty because there's plastic on that. I feel guilty if I drive anywhere. I feel guilty if I fly anywhere. That means that the biggest commodity that we all have, and one of the most important things that we can deliver in terms of value, is anything which can help us to alleviate guilt. So my big takeaway would be anything that you can do to help alleviate guilt. That's very much for the future in any way, shape or form.
I would say consider combining your success and the factors that make your success. Also consider putting that alongside your impact. What impact are you having with the campaigns you're running? What impact are you having as a business as a whole? Is there a way of making a positive impact with the campaigns that we're doing and kind of going out there and looking after the environment? Because I think that is now, it is a road to be more sustainable and to be aware of your impact, but also can you then combine that with encouraging other people to go and visit the destinations?
Yeah, I found this question quite hard because every brand is quite different, right? And you'll have different goals. But right back to basics, I would say the most important thing is just to understand what the problem is and understand how that problem then relates to your brand. Understand the audience that you're trying to talk to and the audience that you're trying to target. Work with those two sort of together. And then again, on the advocacy of social media, really use it as such the powerful tool that it is to raise awareness of certain issues. So maybe not necessarily highlighting things that are really bad, but highlighting the good that we are doing, and the awareness that we are raising of issues, and that goes beyond Instagram for me as well now. TikTok is something that everyone's talking about and something that I'm really interested in, and hashtags were brought up at the beginning of this conversation for potentially being a cause of over-tourism, but I think that hashtags and hashtag challenges on TikTok, which are becoming huge, are a great way of raising awareness of issues. So I think as brands and as agencies, we can all use social media as a hugely powerful tool to combat against it.
Amazing, thank you. I'm going to dip right into the questions, because we've got some really great ones here. So thank you for everyone who's put them forward on Slido. If you've got anything last minute, I'll try and whip it in if you add it now. The first question we have here is, our best performing social content is always the on-trend and highly aesthetic destinations. How can we balance hitting KPIs with promoting lesser known places?
How are you measuring best performance? Because I think brands, and we have been guilty of this as well, is just including all engagements as like good performance, and likes and shares and things like that are, or like a 3-second video view. A lot of brands will include that as an engagement. It's about the value of the engagements as well. I think I would look at conversation, look at social listening, what sort of conversations are coming out of the content that you're posting, and start to measure more valuable metrics. So on Instagram you can now see forwards, saves, comments as well, the sentiment in the comments, and that's something that's more and more important for us going forwards.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one? Okay, I'm going to go straight to Whayeb and we'll have something to say
About this too. It's most cost effective to fly to Venice than it is to get the train to Newcastle. How can we level out the playing field?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm often asked about the fairness of travel, especially when I'm talking about airfares going up. And for me, there's a lot of social justice around it. And I don't think of the family of 4 from the UK. I think of the family of 4 from Bangladesh who are never going to fly and have to cope with the effects of climate change. But it's also unfair for other forms of industry. For the rail sector, the coach sector. Yes, there may be some issues. I think there are some issues in the rail sector. So there may be some pricing issues and some competition issues, but nothing compared to what's happening in aviation. The fact that kerosene is exempt from duty and VAT is just bonkers. The fact that shipping fuel is not taxed. It does create such an unlevel playing field, so it makes it really difficult to get to book anywhere from any other form of transport. So it's something we're trying to change. We're the only travel company that I know who are lobbying for an increase in taxation. Firstly, to slow down the rate of growth, because if you think about the 1.5 degree target for climate heating, you have to get a 55% reduction on the 2017 CO2 levels by 2030. That is not going to happen if aviation continues to grow at 4%. And what's driving aviation to grow at 4% is oversupply, and it's very low barriers to entry, but also the fact there's no tax. It's very, very sad about Thomas Cook, and generally I probably know lots of people that work for the company, but an airline going out of business in the UK is probably a good thing. Taking those aircraft out is probably a good thing. That level playing field does need to be leveler, and the rail sector has been massively disadvantaged.
Just very quickly from that, if you're using that to say to a client, or if you're booking something, how from a personal perspective can you sort of rationalise that? Anyone else want to jump in on upping your costs essentially?
I think there's 2 things. First, influencers are often asked to pay for their own travel and to make the travel there to a certain location or destination. So whether you can have that open conversation about, okay, but it's going to cost me this much, and I'm going to go in a sustainable way, and I'm going to be combining that coverage alongside the location itself. Can you find a way of subsidising that? The question I actually wanted to ask Tim was, is there a way of publicly supporting the lobbying you're doing for asking for tax on those items?
Yeah, we haven't quite got to a sort of petition level, but yes, there would be. I think the other thing that we're trying to do, because obviously no one trusts the government, especially at the moment. So I don't want to give them more money, but APD, the air passenger duty, is raises 3.4 billion at the moment. What we're saying is put it up ring-fence it and use that money to develop sustainable aviation faster. It's coming, as it's coming in automotive, it's just not coming fast enough. So, biofuels, synthetic fuels, hybrid, none of that technology is developing fast enough. But you get that, and it probably will come in the next 20, 30, maybe 40 years. You get to that level, you think, happy days, you can fly as much as you want. But until that, aviation becomes more expensive, and we all need to fly less. That is a fact. There's no way around it. Whether you're an influencer or an individual or travelling for work, there's just no way around the fact that of your 5 flights a year, one of them's got to go. Period.
That ties neatly into a question
For Besma here, have you or any of your influencer network ever turned down a travel campaign because it contributed to overtourism?
So I have personally done so. I was asked to visit a certain brewery in Copenhagen, and they come out with new packaging that's eco-friendly. I was meant to interview the CEO, and I basically said, it's great that you're doing something that's more sustainable, but I don't want to get a flight to Copenhagen and back and be there for something like 2 days, so it'll be in and out. Unfortunately, I had to turn that down and kind of end that partnership. So it's difficult, and I think even operating in this space and being more sustainable generally, I have to turn down things a lot of the time because my audience is going to point that out straight away. That's not sustainable. That's not okay. And people are quite open to having those conversations. So, yeah.
Great. Then from a more company-wide level, how do we meet our company goals of more visits to a long-haul destination while trying to be more sustainable? Anybody want that one?
That's tough. I mean, if that's I suppose I have to ask the question: why is that? Why is that the objective? Is the objective to feature more long-haul destinations, or is it to actually travel to long-haul destinations? Because if it's to feature long-haul destinations, then I still don't necessarily think that there's a need to actually be there per se from the UK. I think it can be done another way.
One thing we're not saying is don't fly. I think one of the things that is worth bearing in mind is there are plenty of communities around the world where tourism is not a luxury. Tourism is how they feed their families. Tourism is often the main industry. So I think going to those destinations is a good thing. If you have to get there by a flight, that's a good thing as well. I think we've already touched on it. One of the ways you can reduce the amount of flights you take and add benefit to a local community is to go for longer. Clearly, if you've got 5 weeks holiday allowance and you spend 2 weeks just using 2 flights, you will fly less. What the real flights that have to go on, the stag do's to Prague, the city breaks, especially where there's rail alternatives. So I would say you can still do those long haul flights, you can still meet those objectives. You've really got to be careful about making sure that what we talk about is making your flight count. And if you're going somewhere where your money is not going to trickle down into the economy, then I really question about why you're doing it. One of some of the easy sort of tick list you might want to come across is, is the place I'm staying at internationally owned? In which case, don't. Does it involve a large cruise? In which case, don't. Does it involve an all-inclusive, where there's no money going into the local economy? In which case, don't. Those are, they're simple rules. Obviously, there are exceptions, but those are the types of questions I would be asking. It's just like we have to say, it comes on to the role of social media that you can do. Is one thing is about awareness. We talked about flying less, but what you can also do through these channels is inspire curiosity. So what I find with tourists is they tend to take a holiday from their responsibilities. So you find the most kind of eco person in the UK. They get on a plane, they arrive at a destination, it all goes out the window. So I think inspiring that curiosity by means of asking those questions. Who owns this? That food on my plate, where's it come from? Is it local? Talking to your cabin boy or chambermaid or chef. How much do they pay? Where do they live? Do they enjoy working there? So those sorts of questions will give you a very quick idea as to whether the place you're staying at has got any sorts of sustainable credibility. So that curiosity, I think, that social media is a perfect channel.
Right, just digging a little deeper, essentially, I think is a good place to start there. Another person has asked, do you consider overtourism as an ethical issue that should be tackled through travelling less, locally, or tackled via technology, science and offsetting?
Can we go for both? Why not? I think it's not just an equity issue, but again, I'm biased in thinking that sustainability is not just an issue that people who are focusing on sustainability need to talk about. Is everybody needs to be involved. Everybody needs to know the impact of their travel, of their journeys, of their lives. So finding ways of innovating around that and creating a way of travelling more sustainably where people who don't care about that can still do it, brilliant. We need that. But I don't think that's going to come very quickly, and I think we also need people demanding better. So whether you're an influencer or just somebody who's actually within the industry, if you can find ways to reduce the impact and be more sustainable, that's important too.
Can I just say about offsetting? In a word, don't. For reasons. So there was a report, the EU report in 2017, which said 85% of offset schemes don't work. When you think about the 10-year horizon, getting the temperature down, most offset schemes work in the 30 to 100-year timescale. Thirdly, there's the moral argument about paying somebody else to allow you to keep doing what you're doing. I liken it to the sort of Reformation church that used to sell indulgences so that you could keep sinning. It's just there's a moral argument to it. But fourthly, probably most important, it's a massive distraction. The argument has to be around carbon reduction, not carbon offsetting. And while the price of carbon is so low and it's so cheap to offset your flight, there's no incentive for the airline or the cruise industry to really develop those technologies I was talking about. So by all means plant trees, by all means invest in carbon reduction projects, but don't in any way think that offsets the flight that you've taken or are about to take.
Sorry, I'm going back to you, Besma, because you mentioned offsetting earlier very quickly. Does that surprise you? Is that something you have thought about? Because I know you mentioned about offsetting your content.
So a big thing for me this year was tracking my carbon emissions, and that's something that I wrote a whole guide around, and actually understanding that my flights make up a big percentage of my overall carbon emissions for the entire year. And it was something that I felt immediately guilty about because they're booked, they're kind of done. And when you go through the checkout and says, would you like to donate £1 to carbon offsetting, you kind of go, spending £200 on flights, £1 carbon offsetting, I don't think is going to do anything. So I actually donated to a charity protecting rainforests. So it's slightly different in terms of it's not just carbon offsetting, it's actually finding ways of protecting the natural environment that already exists. Like, let's have some of that. But I do recommend actually taking full account of all your carbon emissions, flights, but also how you travel on your day-to-day journeys. Are you driving? Can you take public transport? Can you cycle? Can you walk? Whether you eat meat, whether you can reduce the amount of meat you have in your diet each week. Doing lots of things that can reduce that impact generally is, I agree, far more impactful than just saying, I'll offset it, so I don't have to think about it anymore. That's not going to work. Yeah.
I've got a question for Jen here about London. Have you found that visits to London for British tourists living in the UK has decreased year on year as overseas travel continues to increase?
No, we saw the opposite, I think, but that was to do with various terror attacks and things like that happened a few years ago. We saw a slight decline in domestic tourism, and that's why we've got a whole team dedicated to it now and a consortium of different partners that are trying to boost domestic tourism and work with the other cities within the UK as well to kind of disperse people around.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to whiz through two questions really quickly, hopefully in 2 minutes, so I'm going to be really quick. With the rise in most Instagrammable hotels and restaurants, how is that not an avenue to promote sustainability? It's already such a big pull for tourists.
I think if you're going to somewhere where it's already popular, you're not supporting the competition, and I don't need to have competition there. I think a good example of my own personal experience, I worked with Bath, and I went to Bath, and essentially stayed in an independent hotel. They connected me with 2 restaurants that were using local farm foods, and that they were kind of coming in and talk about what's seasonal and what's on the plate. And I also got to visit the vintage market and actually go and buy some second-hand pieces. And I thought that was a really well curated trip because they'd got me to go and visit places I potentially might not have known about. if I was just coming to Bath and wanted to spend some time there. And at the same time, there's plenty of places where you can go and it's a big tourist hub, and yeah, fine, you get some lovely shots and put them on Instagram, but does that really set you apart, and do you want to be just the same as everybody else? I don't know,
I think there's a trend away from that now.
Yeah, okay.
Like it's almost a bit naff to do what everyone else is doing. So, and especially with like millennial generation, I hate the word millennial, but with our generation, it is a trend to be more ethically conscious and environmentally conscious. So for us at highlighting London as becoming more of a sustainable city, working with our partners and hotel brands to raise awareness of the sustainable actions that they are making, the sustainable changes they're making, will encourage other people to want to go and shout about it too.
Just on that as well, my audience on the podcast for Low Season Travel, I've spoken to quite a lot of them, and hearing what they're saying is just supports your point. Is they love being different. They love the fact that they're actually seeing the world at times when most people aren't seeing the world because they're going during the low seasons and they're having a different experience. So again, it's a point to highlight. Interestingly enough, we sort of haven't touched on it, but there's a cultural heritage question actually in all of this as well, because there is, with over-tourism, there's an erosion of cultural heritage around the world, and there's various examples of this, which is actually horrifying as well, because as we know, in the animal kingdom, extinction is forever, and it's the same with our cultural heritage. And our cultural heritage is the invisible skin we wear that defines us, and that's eroding as well. And what we're seeing is that a lot of people are trying to go for, UNESCO was set up to protect these different sites. And now, if it's on the UNESCO one, that's part of your bucket list. You want to go to the UNESCO site. And something I'd love to see would be a top 10 not on UNESCO yet. I think because again, it's that you're going against the grain. We're not going to go to all the UNESCO sites because there's some other incredible sites around the world. Just one, if I may. But I came across, if anybody here has been to Nîmes at all in France. In the middle of Nîmes, there is what I can only describe as, I'm sure that's not what it's officially called, but it's like a mini Colosseum. Absolutely out of this world, Roman amphitheatre, absolutely breathtakingly stunning. And I just couldn't believe that I'd never heard of it. That to me, not on UNESCO, wouldn't even know it was there, and yet that is as old as the Colosseum and arguably better preserved as well. That's the kind of stuff that we want to be highlighting.
It's quite nice to step out of the geotagging, you're actually going to discover a little bit more, which I think is quite nice. I'm just going to draw back quickly to the poll we had earlier on the name of the words that come to mind in the audience here of over-tourism, which was environment, privilege, overcrowded, pollution, destruction, small, Everest, erosion, Venice. Interestingly, unsustainable is the largest one that's coming up. Influencers, queues, budget airlines, photo and space, and I think we've touched upon all of those elements anyway, which is great. But I'm just going to go back to the final question here, just to wrap it up for all of you, of what exactly do you deem over-tourism and what is the tipping point?
I think over-tourism can be anywhere, and if you look at our site, we actually mapped it out. We mapped every mention of over-tourism around the world, and over-tourism can happen in very small places because it's a capacity issue. Skye has over-tourism because it has very few locals and very few residents. So for me, it's growing and it exists. We'll leave it there.
I've just put the map up for everyone to have a look at of the over-tourism spots that were. This can be found on Tim's website. It's quite alarming. But yeah, I'm just going to go back down to you, Jeff.
For me, over-tourism, I always, whenever I'm sharing anything about over-tourism, which is quite a lot, I always call it so-called over-tourism, because for anything to be over something, you need to have a recommended guideline. So I'm overweight by approximately 1 stone. I know this because the medical professionals have looked at my height and my build, and they've told me this is the recommended weight range that I should be in, and I'm 1 stone over. A bit embarrassing, but there we go. My weight will fluctuate, but I know where it should be. Tourism destinations, they don't know what their ideal number of tourists is. So when you speak to a Minister for Tourism or a CEO of a tourism authority, and you ask them, what is the capacity for your destination? They don't know. That's pretty frightening. So one of the challenges for me is actually destinations, understanding what is over-tourism and where is that tipping point that we're talking about, because they don't always know. And the other part is it's to do with surge tourism. You know, a lot of this is surges. You have seasons and you have seasonality. We've always had seasons and seasonality, but over the course of the whole year, if it was spread around, a lot of those destinations wouldn't be suffering from so-called over-tourism because there would be a fairer distribution. So a lot of it is about tourism surges, and I won't even mention cruise.
I think from my side, I talk more from a consumer's point of view and influencers' point of view. It would be travelling somewhere for the sake of just creating content and going in somewhere, quickly taking photos and getting out of there. I think if you go anywhere, you should have an awareness of the impact you're having and how you can both experience the culture in a specific way and also be sustainable or support the local economy there.
Similar, kind of a combination of all answers, but over-tourism to me is influx of people in a place or a destination that can't handle it, doesn't have the infrastructure to handle it, whereas having a negative impact on the locals or the environment. I think for brands and agencies and tourism boards, as Jed mentioned, there's kind of a responsibility there not to just chase big numbers, not to chase big numbers in terms of the amount of people that you're bringing in, or the amount of like engagement you're getting on social as well, but it's about like the quality of those numbers. So for whatever brand or agency you do work for, back to a social media point of view, I'd always say don't focus on like the high reach numbers. It doesn't mean anything. Focus on the good quality metrics and measure those. Even though they might be smaller, they're more meaningful. You can apply that to tourists and visitors as well. Not just bringing high floods of people to a place for a short period of time, but bringing them for longer periods of time, getting them to move around and making them aware of the issues and how they can be more sustainable once they are in a destination.
I think I'm just going to add something. I think I've had a conversation with you guys before from a very micro level of what over-tourism is looking at geotagging and hashtagging and sending a lot of people to one very small destination, be it a cafe or a bridge, by using a very specific influencer. This happens hugely in different cultural areas. Given the bigger the influencer, you'll find over the years that one spot will become a tourist hub, and I know Tim, you were saying this before, that they have no idea why at the beginning, and then suddenly they're overhauled with people. So when you're working with people, be very careful about the locations you're picking as well in that sense. But yeah, I think that's a really nice roundup of the causes, the effects, and how we can possibly start to counteract it. If anyone has any further questions, the guys are happy to stick around for a little bit longer. Feel free to come up and chat to me and everybody else. But thank you so much for joining. Thank you.